Welcome to Babes in Bookland, your women's memoir podcast. I'm your host, Alex Franca, and today, author Linda Rhodes joins the podcast to discuss her memoir, Breaking the Barnyard Barrier, A Woman Veterinarian Paves the Way. She graduated fourth in her class from one of the best veterinary schools in the country and still couldn't get a job. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was a woman. I tore through her memoir in one sitting, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it makes me want to start a production company just so I can option it. Linda spent years as a large animal vet in the state of Utah, navigating misogyny, a crumbling marriage, and the death of her mother, all while literally elbow deep in dairy cows. Breaking the Barnyard Barrier is a story about grit, grief, love, and what it means to carve a path no one carved before you. Hi, Linda.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I adored your memoir. I told you before we started recording, but I tore through it. It was such a fascinating and well-written story. I admired your grit, your ability to keep pushing forward through misogyny and ignorance. I loved reading about your parents, and I was in awe of the way that you navigated a demanding job, caring for your parents, while also trying to keep a marriage afloat. I think your story and your journey will inspire a lot of women, and I think it would make a hell of a movie. Seriously, there are so many great moments of accomplishment, badass moments where you prove yourself, and then there are the heartbreakingly human moments, the struggles that you write about and reflect on so beautifully. So if I ever get my production company off the ground, I'm optioning this.
That's nice of you to say. Actually, I just got some feedback from one of my friends who just read the book, and he said, "Oh my God, that sign where you let loose with all that blue language and horrified the Mormon dairymans, and you were swearing up a blue streak, and they were like, they'd never heard a woman talk like that." And so,
women, they're men too. No, I'm just kidding. There are so many funny moments. Yeah, I think this is just a great story. All right, so before we get into the meat of your memoir, let's talk about the process. Why now, Linda? What inspired you to finally sit down and say, you know what, I'm ready to tell this story. I want to tell this story.
Actually, it had a lot to do with my mother's death. She died when she was 58. I was in my 30s. Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I kind of thought, well, she was old. I wasn't curious about her life. And years later, when I got into my 50s and I had my own son and experienced motherhood, there were so many things I wish I'd asked her and so many stories that I know she had to tell that never got told. And I thought about my son and how he's not interested in his mother's career and knows nothing about my adventures as a dairy cow vet. So when he was about 10 years old, I said, I want to write these stories down for him. I want him to be able to remember, to know who I was back then. And, you know how kids are. I mean, he might not be curious about it until I'm dead and gone. So I want to write it down.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the genesis of why I started writing.
Wow. Well, that's such a beautiful gift. When I turned the age that my mother was when she had me, when I became a mother, basically, we were actually the same age, I realized, oh my gosh, there's this whole part of her life and whole part of my father's life that I don't know who they were. I only know them as I perceive them as my parents and who they're purposefully showing me, right? Like who you are to your son as
Right.
mother is a different woman, is a different person because, obviously it's a different type of relationship. So I think that is such a beautiful idea. And I know that there are a lot of companies out there now that can kind of help people if you don't know the right questions. You actually have a fantastic story to tell, but maybe some people don't feel that way, right? They're like, oh, well, I just, went to school, did like all the normal stuff. I didn't break any barriers. I didn't set out and pave this way for women. But there are a lot of great companies out there that can help people just write down the story of their life because everyone's story is important.
I mean, even the simple stories, like how did I get this quilt? Or where did this recipe come from? Or, even the simple stories have such meaning when you get older and you think back on your past that it is really wonderful to write them down.
Did your son know that you had been married before?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. He knew that story. He really didn't know the full extent of the dairy cow vet stories, though. So
Sure.
that's been fun seeing him learn about that part of my life.
I bet. All right. So then how long did it take you to sit down and write the book? And was it just starting as I'm writing these stories down for my son? And when did it morph into, hey, maybe this is something that I actually want to share with the world?
Well, I started, gosh, almost 20 years ago at a workshop at Cornell, a summer workshop. It was a memoir writing workshop. So I kind of had the idea in my head that I wanted to write down some of these stories, didn't know what I was doing. So I thought, I'll take this workshop. I was very surprised when I said the morning you were supposed to write a story, in the afternoon, you would read it and critique it. When I sat down with my computer, this story just poured out of me. It's like had been waiting to be told. And by that time, I was long past my dairy cow vet days and into my animal pharmaceutical company days. But these old stories were just there. And I really felt passionate about them. And when they started pouring out of me at that workshop, I was like, oh my God, this is really something that I have to do something with. And it was several years later did I kind of think about it as a real book that should be eventually published. But at that moment, I just felt like, you know how your subconscious just suddenly comes up with content that you don't even know you had in you. And it just poured out of me. I was just like writing stories that whole week, and people seemed interested in them. And I thought, well, maybe there's something here. The problem was I was writing like a scientist. Because I have published many scientific manuscripts, which, are very dry and very factual. And so I was writing like a scientist, and I was lucky enough to connect with a writing teacher who said, you kind of have to start over. You have to write like a storyteller. You have to bring the reader into the barn with you. You have to tell them how it smells, how the air feels, what it sounds like, what people are wearing. You have to set a scene. And I had never written like that before. So I had a lot to learn.
Well, you accomplished that. Let me tell you, you really did.
You were in the barn?
I was there with you. I mean, gosh, especially when you're talking about having to feel the cows to see if they were pregnant. I don't know why that moment stuck with me. I think because I could feel your guilt at not being certain and like potentially sending a pregnant mother to her death. That moment really stuck with me. I don't know why. I don't know what that says about me. It's always surprising what kind of jumps out from memoirs to people. So as these stories are pouring out of you, there are some struggles. You talk about, losing your mother. You talk about a marriage ending, your father aging. Did you confront moments of grief that you weren't expecting, or was there anything surprising kind of as you allowed this to flow out of you and through you?
Yeah, it was hard writing about my mom's death. That was hard. At the time, I was kind of the caregiver in chief and the organizer in chief, and I was doing the meals, and I was doing the insurance, and I was doing the discussion with the doctors. And I don't think I allowed myself to really feel it as much back then. So yeah, writing it was hard. It was re-experiencing that level of grief of that loss. And as you see in the book, I don't really show a lot about the time from when she was in the hospital to when she came home. I don't really describe that. I just kind of say I'm flying out there and I know she's going to die. And then the book just goes into she's dead and we're carrying on. And I debated a lot about that. I got really conflicting advice from different writing teachers about how much of that to include and not include. But I think I reached the right balance. I think I did. You don't want to wallow in that grief. I mean, everybody knows how difficult it is to lose a parent, but you want to show it. I tried to make a balance there, and I think it worked.
I do too. I think you're also allowed to keep some things for yourself. Just because you set out to write a memoir, I mean, I do hope that people are as authentic and truthful in their memoirs as they can be, because that's what we deserve as the readers. But you're right. I mean, I thought it was perfect because sometimes, like when you watch a horror movie, if you don't see the monster's scarier. Like I knew that your grief was large and that you were holding it. I didn't need you to spell it out for me, because at that point, I've already taken part of the journey with you, so.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me. That was one of the harder parts to write, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Were there any parts that you were hesitant to share? I mean, do you change the names of the men a couple of them?
So my publisher suggested that I change some names. Some names are not changed, but they felt like they didn't want to offend anybody. The people who I wrote about know it's them. Well, yeah, actually what I think was hard was to write the chapter about the cow that I killed when I gave an IV of calcium. That cow died, and I just was horrified. And I realized as I was writing the book, I was telling all these interesting stories, but most of them were success stories, but it wasn't all success. And I talked with my writing teacher, and I said, I think I have to choose a difficult failure to make this a more balanced, real vision of what practice was really like. So that was a hard piece to write. And then it was extremely hard to write the piece about my husband's accident.
Yeah.
reliving that was hard. I had to really think back about the details. I hadn't thought about it in many years, and it took me a long time to kind of piece together and remember what the chronology was, what happened first, what happened second, how it all worked out. But yeah, I think that was probably the second hardest piece to
That
write.
was wild. And you really did a great job of putting us into your shoes. I felt the confusion, the hopelessness, and also that weird feeling where your marriage was already in this place that you were feeling like, what can our next step be? And we'll get into that. But had you talked to Vincent before publishing the book? Did you send him? Is he still alive?
Yes, yes, he is. And actually, he still lives in the community in upstate New York, playing music with his
Good for
brothers,
him. Good for him.
which is what he always wanted to
Yeah.
do. And he's a very well-known musician. My sister lives in the same town, so she's maintained a relationship with him and his brothers.
Okay.
And the publisher asked me to send him a copy. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and I hadn't talked to him since the 80s. So my sister gave me his email and I sent him a copy. I said, you know, I'm publishing this. I'm going to change the names, but my publisher really wanted to get your reaction before it goes out into the public. And, you know, they were just worried that he might raise a ruckus about it for some reason. He was so gracious.
Mm.
Was so amazingly gracious. He just said that he loved the memoir, that I was an amazing woman. He corrected a whole bunch of details, like I had gotten the toes that he lost
Okay.
wrong. And, you know, some little things like that. I had gotten the work that had done in Utah wrong, and he reminded me what he'd done. But he said, you don't need to change anything. We might have different memories of this. He was incredibly gracious. And then about 3 months ago, I went to Ithaca and I met with him.
And
Yeah,
how was that?
it was lovely.
Yeah.
You know, he's remarried. He has a son who's about the same age as my son.
Wow.
We traded parenthood stories. He was at a gig playing music, and I got to hear him. And then at the break, we had a little chat, and it was, you know, it was lovely. So there you go. Who would have ever imagined?
Look at what the rippling effects of sharing your story has continued to
Yeah.
do. His reaction tracks with the character that you set him up to be. You don't dislike Vincent. It's heartbreaking anytime that a relationship doesn't work out when two people want it to. And you guys just had battling dreams is kind of what I took away from your memoirs. You had two very
Yeah,
different
exactly.
dreams. Ultimately, it was an act of love to let one another go to pursue those dreams. And here's the rest of your life. It is wild to me,
Yeah.
you know. I can't imagine looking back decades from now, but I think about close friendships I had growing up in high school and how I don't talk to these people who had such a profound effect on my life.
Yeah. Well, you should get those relationships back. I actually do a Zoom every Tuesday night with 5 of my old high school friends.
Wow.
And high school, I graduated in 1966.
Hey.
We've known each other for many, many, many
Wow.
decades, and we're growing old together, and we still are very, very close friends. So those are relationships that are really worth reuniting and rekindling.
Yeah. Okay. I may take your advice. I've got a couple that I still am close friends with, but there's just the few that got away, you know, because life happens, things happen.
It's hard, yeah.
I might take this as a sign to reach out.
Yeah, it's worth the effort.
Yeah, yeah. One last question of process. You write that it took you years to get this down, but did you have any moments where you stepped away from it for a long time because you felt blocked or not really?
I did. I had a full manuscript and I finally found an agent, which, as you know, is a very difficult thing to do.
Yes.
And she had me write a book proposal because for a nonfiction book like a memoir, you have to write a whole proposal, which is another like 90 pages of writing, but it's more like a marketing document.
Okay.
So I wrote that. She shopped it around to a bunch of publishers. I got some good feedback, but nobody bought the book. Nobody wanted the book. And she came back and said, well, based on all this feedback, I think you need to change this and you need to change that and you need to do something this differently. And I was just like, oh no, I can't. And I just had to stop. And I just told her I need a break. And about 6 months went by and all of her advice was going on in my head and it just didn't feel right to me. And then she called me and said she decided to get out of publishing. She was leaving her gig as an agent and she was giving me back the book rights. So now I was back to, you know, ground zero. And I just realized she had urged me to do things to the book that I didn't think worked. And she had asked me to get rid of a couple of chapters that I thought were good chapters. I put them back in. So I had quite a break, like a half a year's break when I just stewed on her advice. And I really had a breakthrough because I realized that not all advice is good advice.
No, that's an important lesson to learn, and that can be really hard to discern for
Yeah,
yourself.
especially from somebody who's supposedly an expert agent and in the publishing world.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that was my big kind of step back. Once I decided to take the book on and make it what I thought it needed to be and not worry about selling it, it got much better.
Mm.
It got much, much better. And that's when I started contacting university academic presses. And that's when I got my publisher. University of Nevada was delighted with it. They were like, don't change a thing. We love it. It went through peer review where they sent it out to two other writers to make comments, and they made really minimal comments. And that's when I kind of knew I was on the right track.
That's amazing.
It's a long journey.
Yeah, but worth it. Definitely worth it because now it's out there. Now it's out there for everyone
Yeah.
to get a hold of. And of course, we always link ways to buy the book from bookshop.org so that people can support their local indie bookstores.
Nice.
But run, don't walk. Gallop, don't walk to get this book. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. So, take me through your choice of choosing large animal medicine. You graduate from college and you're like not quite sure what to do next. And then you go live on a commune, which I would read a memoir just about your time on the commune, probably.
That's a whole other story, right? Yeah. When I got there, I had grown up in a suburban neighborhood with cats. I mean, I'd never taken care of farm animals. I'd always kind of had a dream about horses. Oh, someday I could ride a horse, but we didn't have money to have horses or go to horseback riding. So when I got out there, I had everything to learn. And they had about 30 goats and maybe 20 sheep and a horse and a pig and a bunch of dogs and 200 chickens. And
Mm.
it was a crazy place. And so I was working for room and board. And the first thing that they asked me to do is milk the goat. So I had to learn how to milk a goat. And from then on, I just really enjoyed being in the barn. I got a kick out of learning everything I could learn about how to take care of these animals and what they needed and, how to clean up their barn and what to feed them and how to trim their hooves and how to milk them and how to shear the sheep. And I just fell in love with it. I liked all the physicality of it. I'd been in college for 4 years where it was like you sit at a desk basically.
Mhm.
And it was just great to be out in nature and moving around and learning all kinds of new things. And
What is your favorite thing about farm animals, the large animals? I love where you were like, it all started with goats, and then you talked about
yeah,
having to
yeah,
milk the
it pretty
goats.
much did. Well, I'll talk about cows. I mean, goats are the same, but the cows are much more intelligent and sensitive than you would
Yeah.
think. They're very observant. They're very curious. I mean, the same is true of goats. Goats kind of even more so because I think goats are a little more intelligent than cows. But have you seen the videos of people like out in the pasture playing music and the cows come over the pasture and they all like look at the guy that's playing music and they're just wonderfully curious and intelligent animals, which I think we generally appreciate.
Mhm.
And they're just silly. I mean, that term when you say, oh, she hightailed it down the road. Well, that comes from cows because when a cow runs, she puts her tail straight up in the air and kind of waves it around and just dashes across the pasture. And that's the hightailing it thing. So they're just endlessly curious and to develop a relationship so you could like kind of read them and they could kind of read you. That took me years. I mean, the dairymen kind of have it in their bones, but I had to work at it. But after a while, they all have personalities. I mean, most of the cows that I worked with had names.
Mm,
Pinky and Daisy and Lemon and Marcy, and they all had names and they were
I
personalities.
love that.
So it was
My
fun.
grandmother had cows. My grandmother had a farm growing up. She got rid of the cows when I was still fairly young, but I remember she had like two or three, and me and my cousins would go out there and they have puppy dog eyes, like
Oh yeah,
they're
beautiful eyes. Yeah.
soulful creatures. And I do think that there's a disconnect that has to happen if you're a beef eater, like there's only so much maybe that you can stop and think about how
Yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
large animals are.
Well, that's one of the reasons I like doing dairy
Yeah.
because your aim was to keep the animals healthy and alive.
Yeah.
So they could make the most milk they could make. That was a nice way. And then it was also the calves are beautiful, and it was really fun to see the calves growing up. But I always had the science brain. I was a science nerd in college, and I kind of missed the science stuff. So I bought a Merck veterinary manual, and I would read that, and one day I just thought, well, what would be the career that would blend my enjoyment of these animals and being in the barn with the science part of my brain, and being a large animal vet seemed like the perfect fit.
At what point was there a point where a little voice said, "Yeah, but you're a woman"?
It wasn't until I didn't even know it was hard to get into vet school.
Okay.
I mean, it turns out it's much harder to get into veterinary school than into medical school. I had no idea.
Wow. Okay.
But I came back east and I had not taken any biology courses undergrad. So I had to take the minimum 4 biology courses plus organic chemistry in order just to apply to vet
Sounds like
school.
my nightmare, Linda, but good for you.
So yeah, I took genetics and
Wow.
microbiology and anatomy and embryology and organic chemistry. But I knew that I had to get straight A's in order to get into vet
Okay.
school. And there was a pre-vet advisor at that college. It was SUNY Binghamton. And everybody said, oh, you should go talk to the pre-vet advisor. And I went in and he just said, forget it. You'll never get in. Women just don't get accepted. So you just should like figure out something else to do with your life because you'll never get into vet school. And I was just like stunned. And I said, that can't be
Yeah.
right. That just can't be right. But it turned out that it was really hard for women to get into vet school. I was right at the cusp of when, in 1973, when Title IX was passed, which the federal government said you can't discriminate, vet schools had only been admitting 2 or 3 women per class.
Wow.
And so I was right on the cusp of when that changed. My class was 40% at Penn. The same year, there were only like 12% at Cornell and maybe 10% at Wisconsin. And so it was very hard for women to get in, but Penn was much better, and I was lucky enough to get into Penn. But at that moment when he said, forget it, I just already had this can-do attitude. Like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to get in.
I love that.
And I did. So felt very blessed because Penn was one of the best vet schools in the country, and they were more willing to accept women than anywhere else. So I was very
And then
lucky.
you mailed a copy of your acceptance letter to that guy. No, I'm just kidding. That's what I would have done. I would have showed up and been like, see, told you I could do it. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, that was just the first hurdle for you to have to overcome.
Yeah.
You want to show your advisor that he's wrong. You do show him that he's wrong. You get into Penn. There's other women. You're looking around. You're saying, okay, I'm not the sole apple on the tree here. But you didn't really have a female figure who was a farm veterinarian that you were looking at. You knew that it would need to be you paving this path, and that never deterred you. You felt confident in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I did have a woman mentor at Penn, Dr. Elaine Hamill, and I talk about her in the book, that she's the one who told me, you never stop being afraid, you just stop showing it.
Yes,
She was terrific. Whenever I'd get into a difficult situation, I would think, how would Elaine handle this? So
I love
she's
that.
still alive, by the way, and I am going down to University of Pennsylvania to do a book reading, and I'm gonna see her.
Oh my gosh, that's
She's 90
incredible.
years old. It's really sweet that so she has a copy of the book. I gave her a copy of the book. So she was a really good role model. And there was one other woman who was at Cornell, and I spent a summer riding with the Cornell vets when I was in school. And she was smaller. She was a very small woman, but she was a terror and she could do anything. So I used her as an inspiration too, because when I saw her in action in the dairy. She was a goat specialist, but she did some dairy work as well.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I got connected with her. So I had 2 women when I was in the depths of thinking, oh my God, women just really can't do this. I would think, but Mary did it and Elaine did it. But I didn't know any women practitioners that were not in academic
Mm-hmm.
settings.
Mm-hmm.
And in academic settings, you always have backup.
Mm-hmm.
You can always bring the animal into the hospital. You can, if you have a real problem, or you're at the farm, you can call for backup and there's dozens of students and other faculty who can come and help you.
Right.
I didn't have that. So I didn't know any women that were out in the real world, not academic world, practicing. So I really did have to pave the way. I think I was the only woman veterinarian, large animal vet in the entire state of Utah at the time.
I would be curious in America as well. Like I would really be curious about that.
There were dozens, not
Mm-hmm.
hundreds. spread over the whole country.
Wow, that's incredible. Have you ever reached out or been in touch with any of those women?
I have. I actually started a Substack I'm calling Gutsy Women.
Yes, we love Substacks.
I'm trying to find those stories to do little video interviews with. And I have connected with a couple of women who said they would be willing to come on with me. I haven't actually done it yet. I'm kind of busy with launching the book,
Yeah.
but my goal is to exactly that, find those women and get their
I
stories.
love that because you're right. We all need those names in our head as we're trucking through whatever it is we're trucking through, even if it doesn't quite match up, in this exactly the same world. Just knowing there are other women out there who are doing the damn thing, fighting the fight. It encourages us
Yeah,
all. It gives us all that strength and that confidence. I
exactly.
think you also should explore a children's book because I would love your story
Mhm.
to read to my child, a version of it. So I'm just throwing that. Linda, I love you, is all I'm saying. Okay. I mean, come on. What else can you give us?
I love that idea. That's a sweet idea. That's a very sweet idea.
Yeah. And you can just name one of the cows Alex. I don't know, whatever, however you want to wink. Okay. So let's talk about some of the pushback that you do start receiving. You graduate from Penn and you can't find a job. You can't find a job. And so what happens next?
Well, I had devoted my 4 years to getting good at doing cow work. I had milked in a dairy and I spent a summer up at Cornell riding around all the dairies and all the courses that I had taken. I had made sure that I took everything that I could that had to do with cows. And I graduated fourth in my class, which was not a small feat at Penn because there were a lot of very smart people there. I just hit a brick wall. I had more than a dozen interviews, and I portray one in the book, but I have another dozen stories that I've written of other interviews where men would just tell me no, I'd never hire a woman. I mean, they'd flat out tell me
Right.
it wasn't subtle.
Right.
And women can't do the work. My wife wouldn't like it if I was riding around with a woman.
I thought that was bananas. A part of me sort of understood the physical aspect of it, right? Okay, fine. Like I don't like it, but I guess I could sort of buy that. But when you brought up, I mean, it wasn't just one person who told you my wife wouldn't like it. I was
No.
like, oh, I'm sorry. The fact that your wife can't trust you, why is that reflecting negatively on me, sir? I'm just trying to milk some cows here.
You're all covered with manure and stinky coveralls, and it's like it's not really a sexy look, but believe me.
Right, right. But you do ultimately end up at Utah State University. You graduate from Penn, and then did you have to get sort of this internship?
No, you're not required as a veterinarian to do an internship to practice. You can go right into a private practice.
But you were exploring all avenues because you just kept hitting brick wall after brick wall after brick
Yeah,
wall.
I wanted to, and they had a clinical internship, and they had a big dairy, and they had a big beef herd, and they had a sheep and goat institute. And I thought if I did an internship there, even though it's not private practice, I'll get a lot of experience,
Yeah,
and then I can go into private practice. But I applied for it, and they turned me down.
right.
And and then I applied for a number of other jobs, and I went out to California, got a California license. I couldn't get a job there. I had to go into small animal practice for a few months because my student loans were due, and I had no money.
Right.
But then a friend called from Utah and said that that internship was open, and like in September, and I said, "How could it be open? It was started in May, and it's for a new grad." And she said, "Well, the guy who took it was a big blonde Mormon guy, and he got kicked by a cow and broke both his legs, and so he's out." And I was like, maybe this is my spot. So I ended up, interviewing for it, and they very, very, very reluctantly said they were so desperate they would just have to give me a chance.
I can't believe that they really told you that too. That must
Oh
have been,
yeah.
you were like, thank you. That's exactly what I
Yeah,
needed
I
to
said,
hear.
when do I start? I mean, I was delighted to have any
Yeah,
job that was in large animals. So I knew it was going to be a heavy lift,
right.
but I was delighted to have it. And
And you
I
get there,
I
and
went
I
out
love
to,
the part where you write about how you're like, "Where's the women's locker room so that I can wash up?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we don't have that." And you're like, "The sink in the women's bathroom would not be sufficient, friends."
yeah, you do get pretty dirty when you're doing dairy cow work.
So throughout all of this, where do you think that this ability to stay the course, this tenacity, grit, where do you think you got that from?
That's a hard question. I don't know. I think I was always like that when I was little. My mother used to say, when Linda does something, she does it 150%. It's just something that I've always had, and I really don't know. I mean, both my parents had to have a lot of grit to do what they did. So I'm sure some of it was inherited. My parents both grew up in small rural towns in Colorado in poverty, both of them in pretty severe poverty. My dad decided to come east. He wanted to study photography, and when he got out of the army, he got the GI Bill would pay for it. So he and my mom drove across the country with two young kids. My sister was 4, I was 6 months
Oh my,
old, and they moved into graduate student housing, and he had to find a way to both feed his family and go to school. So, my dad had incredible grit. I'm sure I learned a lot from just watching him. He worked nights and he went to school days. He worked some pretty awful jobs to support the family. Actually, when he arrived, he would tell the story that he went to the dean and he said, I've got to find a job because I've got to support my family. And the dean said, well, you should just turn around and go back to Colorado because there's no jobs here. And my dad said, I can't because we don't have any more gas money left.
wow.
I've got to find something. So he did. He did eventually find a night job, and it was a nasty job, but he did it. I guess that's your answer. I watched him and my mom just survive in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 kids, cockroaches in the oven, just really difficult. And they kind of clawed their way into the middle class,
Wow.
always really valuing education
Hmm.
and learning.
Passions, it feels like passion as well.
So I was very fortunate. I mean, they were just phenomenal parents, and I'm sure that a lot of my ability to keep going in such a difficult situation was subconsciously referencing what my folks did.
You talked about, what would Elaine do? What would Mary do? Did you have anything, a faith or anything like that that you could also turn to in those moments of not even weakness, but doubt, I guess?
No, it's a good question. I grew up an atheist.
Okay.
I just did not have any feeling of that there was some higher power I could lean on. But I do tell the story that when my mother died, we had some remarkable spiritual moments around that, and it made me believe in life after death. And Vincent's mother said this beautiful thing. I said, she said, "Oh, I'm sure that your mother is in heaven looking down." And I said, well, we don't believe in that. She's an atheist. And Vincent's mother, her face lit up and she said, well, won't she be pleasantly surprised?
Yes, I love that part. I highlighted that part because Vincent's family, Italian Catholic, right?
Very Catholic, yeah.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was just so,
Oh gosh.
so I think
Yeah.
I developed some spirituality, but it wasn't something that I leaned on to get me through tough times in the barn.
Did working amongst such like a Mormon community, did they try to push that on you at all?
Oh, yeah, big time. I had so many copies of the Book of Mormon, you can't imagine. Yeah, yeah. But eventually they figured out that it wasn't, I was not interested in their religion. But what I do hope that you take from the book is that they were a fantastic community. And when I needed help, they helped me, even though I
Yeah.
wasn't a Mormon. And the bishop basically said, you help us, we help you. They were just terrific. And it made me really appreciate the Mormon faith and community because they take care of each other in a way that I think is really extraordinary. So I learned to have a great respect for the Mormon community.
Yeah, when you write about how they just showed up for you when Vincent had his accident and you opened your fridge and there was food there and the women would just come and just sit with you or
Yeah,
Vincent, like that's a really powerful thing, community.
yeah.
I think that is one of the more beautiful aspects of religion.
Yeah, building community, it's so important, especially now. We all need community. And whether
Yeah.
it's a faith community or a neighborhood community, it's really critical. And yeah, they really came through for me in the time that I really needed it. And I'll never forget it. I mean, I talk about it in my acknowledgments in the book. These
Yeah.
were really good people.
Okay, so let's get back to this big break you had. Talk to me about the pressure of having to prove yourself.
Oh gosh, it was very hard. I felt like I had the burden of pretty much all womanhood on my shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was really important that I succeed because
Yeah.
if I didn't, they would say, well, you see, women just can't do the job.
Although, Linda, it was heartbreaking. You were a badass during this internship. You were amazing. And then at the end, he was like, yeah, I don't think we'll hire a woman again. I want to just throw the book across the room. I was like, sir, she literally just proved you wrong. How dare you?
They couldn't get away from their own bias.
Yeah.
They just couldn't get away, even with the truth right in front of their face. Like they could not get away from their own bias. I had a conversation with a small animal vet in Utah, and he said, "Yeah, I hired a girl once. She just didn't work out. You know, she didn't. She was slow in the surgery, and the clients didn't like her, and I had to get rid of her. And so I wouldn't hire another woman." And I said, "Well, have you ever had a guy that didn't work out?" He said, "Oh yeah, I've gone through a lot of guys. You know, this guy and that guy and the other guy didn't work out, and you know, I'm not very good at interviewing, and I guess I chose some rotten apples." And I said, "But you keep hiring guys."
Yeah.
And he stopped and he looked at me and he was like, it was like a light bulb went off in his head. And he said, "Yeah, you're right." It's just like they didn't see their own disconnect. You know, it was so interesting. They couldn't see their own bias.
Hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. So you felt a lot of pressure to be perfect, but you had some moments where you weren't perfect. Talk to me about some of your failures, as you said, as you said, you wanted to include these moments where you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I did not do that right. And then tell me some of your big successes, because those are fun.
Yeah, but I mean, the killing a cow with calcium is always a horrific thing that happens to dairy vets. I had a professor in school who said, if you haven't killed a cow with calcium, you haven't been in dairy practice very long.
Okay.
You have to give these animals calcium because when they deliver their calves, they pour all their calcium into their udder to go into the milk for the calf, and it depletes their calcium so much that their muscles can't work and they just fall down. And it's called milk fever. And the only cure is you have to give them IV calcium. But IV calcium, if you give it too much or too fast, stops the heart.
Okay.
And there's no way to start it again. So you have to be very careful about giving it. And I just wasn't careful enough.
Yeah.
And I was by myself. I didn't have somebody to help me to monitor her heart rate. And I wasn't paying attention. And I killed the cow.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking. That was a really tough one. And then the other thing you mentioned, when I was down in Panguitch doing pregnancy checks on beef cows, and I didn't feel like I was very good at it. And I was worried that I would misdiagnose a pregnant cow as non-pregnant. And the cowboy would said, "Well, yeah, there she goes to McDonald's." And I was like, "Oh my God." So
Yeah.
I never knew, afterwards I went home not knowing how good I'd been. But that was a really hard night. I thought a lot about that.
Yeah.
As you mentioned how it affected you, it definitely affected me in that way. Those were tough. There were always times when I thought, I just can't do this. This is too hard. But what you come to terms with is I'm all there is. There's no other vet within 100 miles. I have my truck. I have the stuff in my truck. That's all I have. I don't have a backup. I don't have a hospital. I don't have a light. I don't have a sterile field. I do the best I can.
Yeah.
And it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And the more experience I got, the better I got. But it was hard coming from a vet school that had all the equipment and all the people and all the procedures and all the support. When you're out there all by yourself in the middle of the night, it's 20 degrees out, you've got a dying cow. You just have to make the best of
You
it.
have to trust your instincts and your judgment and
Yeah.
just go with it. But
And do the best you can.
at this point, you were working at a private practice. This was after you were done with Utah State University, right? And you were working with Ron. And Ron was an interesting character. I liked that he seemed to accept you into his practice pretty easily. I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that was a win. But then he kind of just like stops answering his phone when it's his on-call night. You pick up a lot of the slack, and it turns out that he's like potentially having affairs, and you like know about it. It gets very muddy,
Messy.
messy. Yeah, yeah. How was that? I mean, do you feel like you were taken advantage of because you were a woman?
Kind of yes and no. I mean, I thanked Ron for giving me a job because he was the only large animal vet who ever offered me a job. And he taught me a lot. I mean, he was very good vet. I mean, he was really good. And I learned a lot from him. But just the simple things about how to carry my equipment and how to do things more smoothly and just the way with the farmers. He was really a good vet. But after he saw that I was pretty good too, after a year or so, he began to slack off and let me carry much more of the load. And that was really hard because I was already carrying a pretty heavy load.
Yeah.
So yeah, he did in the kind of second half of, actually even in the first half, he took advantage of me when he went off on vacation right after he hired me and left me with the whole practice with the dairyman who didn't know me and didn't trust me. And
Yeah,
he did what he could to get what he needed out of me, for sure.
for sure, for sure.
Didn't pay me very well. Gave me a washing machine, and which I knew I needed. I didn't realize I needed, but boy, did I need that washing machine. The day I came home with, full of filthy clothes and towels and
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
coveralls.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had a kind of an interesting relationship. I both admired and resented him.
Hmm.
And I hopefully some of that comes across in the book, because it was not a simple friendship.
No, I think that you admired and resented him comes across in the book for sure. Do you know if he is still alive? If there's any chance that he could have
I
a...
tried to track him
Yeah.
down. I really tried hard. And I finally tracked down one of my dairymen who had worked with Ron.
Okay.
And actually, the dairyman had passed away, and I talked to his son.
Okay.
And his son said that after I left, Ron fired all of his clients in Utah, moved up to Idaho, to Grace, Idaho, to work with the best dairies that we had been working with. And he worked with them for a while. And then he kind of went off the deep end on alternative medicine and started like prescribing herbs instead of antibiotics
Oh
and
no.
doing crazy stuff and being more interested in the horses than the cows. And he said we all had to fire him because he turned into a kind of a kook.
Wow. But then who is left? Who is left to be your big animal vet?
Other vets moved into the area. I
Okay.
mean, that was in the 80s. There were now, a few more vets
Okay.
that could take over his practice,
Because
and
your area
other
was
vets.
large, it seemed like in your book. I mean,
Yes,
you,
it was huge.
right. And because it felt like it was just you and Ron.
It was, yeah. But I think, things got better in the mid 80s. I think more vets showed up. And I mean, Blair, the son that I talked to, he said that they had to hire another vet. I don't know exactly who they hired,
Okay.
but he also told me that when I would come to the farm, he was in eighth grade, and he said, I had such a crush on you. I used to go and sit on the fence, and I would skip school on the days I knew you were coming to the farm, and I would like sit
Oh
on the
my
fence and watch
gosh.
you work. I had such a crush on you. And
Oh, shoot, me
that's
too.
just,
You're a fox. Look at that. You look like such a badass in your picture.
and that cow on at the bottom picture, the black cow,
Hmm.
Blair, who I was talking to, told me that he remembered her name, and her name was Pinky.
Pinky the
And
black cow.
that was one of their cows. And he
Wow.
remembered that. He remembered that whole story. Yeah, I sent him a book. He got a big kick out. But unfortunately, his father and the two brothers, all of whom were my best dairymen, have all passed away.
Okay.
But I did get in touch with the guy whose triplets I delivered.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you about that. Was that the rarest thing? That was the rarest thing that
Yeah.
you said you had seen at that time. And then you moved into pharmaceuticals, so you're probably not. But that's an extremely rare thing to happen, triplets.
Yeah, it was so rare that they had to make a newspaper article out
That is
of it.
so wild. I mean, how large did that cow look?
The calves were not as big as normal calves.
Okay.
Each calf was only about 60 pounds. Normally, a Holstein calf can be like 100, 110 pounds.
Wow.
She didn't look abnormally large. And one of my friends just asked me, well, how the hell did you not know that there was another calf in there when you were in mucking around in the uterus? And I said, I never thought that there could be triplets.
Sure.
It never occurred to me. So when I pulled number two out, I just started sewing up. And nobody would have looked for a third calf because they almost never have triplets. But so that was, yeah, it was pretty rare. That was a fun day. And I did find and talk to Greg about 6 months ago, and he left dairying. He's raising beef cows down in Provo, Utah, which is south of where Logan was, but
Okay.
he's still in the cow business.
Okay.
And we had a good laugh over the triplet story.
Wow, that's so incredible. You brought up the pictures on the front of your book. So, because you went with the university press, were you able to have more control over the design of your book? Was it always titled Breaking the Barnyard Barrier? We didn't get to that at the top.
Its first title was Lady Cow Vet.
Okay. Okay.
Because once the farmers got to know me and I got to be more experienced, I was a really good vet and they appreciated it. And because I was the rarity in Utah, when they'd go to like the state fair, they would brag, oh, I've got that lady cow vet taking care of my cows. Like she's a real, it was a really exclusive thing. Because I couldn't take care of everybody's cows.
Yeah.
And so I was like, the lady cow vet was their nickname for me. So that was the original name of the book. I think the publisher thought that it could be misconstrued, that people could think it was like a veteran, or
Huh.
that lady cow could be pejorative in some way.
Mm.
Or actually, they came up with the title, and I liked it. I thought it was a good title.
Mhm.
But they were very generous. We really did everything together. They were just wonderful. I provided all the pictures. They came up with the cover design, which I think is terrific. I love the little cow on the spine, the little cow picture on the spine.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, very sweet. So
Very
yeah,
sweet.
they did an excellent job of layout. They did a very light edit. I was worried that they would ask me to change a lot of things, and they really didn't. They did an extremely light edit. So it's been a real pleasure to work with them.
That's awesome. It sounds like a very supportive, collaborative process,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah, it's been
I think,
great.
what anyone can ask for when they're sharing their life story.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into talking a little bit about your family and your relationships with them and with Vincent, just briefly talk to me about the rest of your career. You pivot to the pharmaceutical industry where you feel like you can make maybe an even larger impact.
Yeah, I went back east and was trying to decide what to do. Should I open my own bovine practice? Because by now I was very experienced and I felt pretty confident. But I was lonely and, I was still single and my mom had died and my father had remarried and he was off to a different life. And so I moved back east to where my sister was to be close to the only family that I really felt close to at that point. And I was thinking maybe I could do this and maybe I could do that. And I wrote letters to the UN to see if I could take care of cows in Africa. And,
Hmm.
I was just thinking about all kinds of different possibilities. And I was doing relief work. So I would go into a large animal practice and take care of the practice while the veterinarian went on vacation. And somehow people at Cornell heard about me and they had an opening for someone to teach the laboratory in cattle reproduction. And that was my specialty. And so it was a very part-time job. It was like, I don't know, 6 months for the year, maybe 2 days a week. But it got me on campus in the vet school. And I met some interesting faculty, and they were apparently impressed with me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a PhD in reproductive physiology. And I was like, well, I've never thought about doing a PhD, but gee, maybe that would allow me to travel and maybe I could be in the library more and I wouldn't have to be out on the farm so much and it would put me in a different world. And I just kind of wandered into this PhD program without much planning or thinking. And it ended up being fabulous. I really enjoyed being back at school. And when I got out, I was recruited into a big job at a big pharmaceutical company doing drug development for animals. And I liked that connection. So I was working on cattle drugs and drugs for poultry and dogs and cats. And yeah, I went into the industry and I've been in the industry ever since.
I think it's incredible that you had this goal that you set out and then you did it. And then you were also able to acknowledge that you did it, have your success, and pivot into something else. I think sometimes it can be really hard if you're trying to prove something. Sometimes we forget that really ultimately all we're trying to do is prove something to ourselves, but it feels like we have to prove something to the world and you don't always know where that line is. And so I love that your memoir is the story of you breaking the barnyard barrier, which you did, but it's also you saying, yeah, I did it. And then I was ready for something else. And that's okay too.
Yeah, and it took me a while to acknowledge that because it was hard to walk away from something that I felt like I was really good at
Yeah.
and that I people admired in me and that, younger women were now looking up to me for inspiration.
Yeah.
So it was hard to. I used to say if I could do the pharmaceutical job 4 days a week and be in the barn the fifth day, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
But you just can't do that. That's not a real job. So yeah, I went into the corporate world and I survived for about 10 years and then I broke out and started my own business. And I was a serial entrepreneur. I started two different animal health companies and they were both really successful and I'm really proud of that. So that was that's a whole nother breaking into an industry that's also difficult, but
Yeah.
it was really enjoyable. And I'm very proud of that work because now I meet people whose dogs are on my drugs and are doing well. And I'm like, oh, that's my drug. New dog is taking for arthritis. And
That's cool.
it's been fun
Have you ever had any women come up to you and say, you are the reason why I thought I could do this?
all the time,
Yeah.
all the
What does that
time. In
feel
fact,
like?
I was just at a veterinary conference in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and a young woman who I mentored came up to me and said, yeah, and she's a very successful career. And she said, I wouldn't have ever been able to do this without you.
Mm.
It's just wonderful. Yeah, I've mentored a lot of young women. In my companies, I hired a lot of young women and made a very family-friendly company.
Mm.
My very first hire and my very first company was a young woman who wanted to have a baby and she didn't know how she was going to balance it with her career. And I said, I can't pay you what the big companies are paying you, but if you're willing to take 30% less, anytime your baby has an ear infection, you'll be staying home and I'll be covering for you. You know, anytime you want to go on vacation, you're going to go on vacation with your kids. You know, you can make your own schedule. I know how hard it is to have a kid and work full time in a demanding job. We will, if you want to bring a crib in and put it in the office, you can do that. Whatever
Wow.
you want to do to make this work, I'll help you. And I actually just saw her a couple of weeks ago. She's got 3 kids. Her youngest is in college now.
Wow. So you're saying it can be done. We can create companies that support women and encourage them to work and be mothers.
Yes, we can. We can. And not only we can, but we should.
Yeah.
And actually, those companies thrive.
Mm.
Because these women who I hired, you know, I let them have a lot of flexibility. But when I needed something, you know, when there was an emergency and oh my God, we had to get everybody in to do this thing over the weekend because this deadline and that deadline, when I would call them, they would be there.
Yeah.
100% for me because I had been there for them. Productivity was good. People were enthusiastic about the work. You can create those cultures. It's just that we don't have enough women leaders who are willing to do that.
I agree. That's something that I talk about a little bit on the podcast from time to time. The women who they think that they had to play by a certain set of rules. And so they want other women to play by those rules instead of turning around to uplift other women. And so I think it's so great that you demonstrated that throughout the rest of your career.
And I started an award called Feather in Her Cap about almost 9 years ago now that gives awards to the women, outstanding women in the pharmaceutical industry to highlight how many great women there are who are still underrepresented. We just had our 9th annual dinner and we gave awards to a number of women. And yeah, if you Google it, Feather in Her Cap, you'll see it. It's turned out to be a really, really influential award that most of the pharmaceutical industry were not aware of how many talented women there were until we started having those dinners. And we have a fancy cocktail party. Everybody dresses up and we put feathers in our hair and we have this great event and we celebrate women in the pharmaceutical industry.
That's fantastic. Why do you think it's so important? Like what compelled you to create that award?
There were not enough women in leadership roles. Mm-hmm. And I would talk to men in leadership roles and they'd say, oh, I just don't really know anybody for that role. And I would say, you have a lot of talented women. If you just give them a little bit of mentoring, you know, you can grow a whole crop of really talented women. And there just was not an awareness of what needed to happen and what talent they actually had. I mean, I had people say to me, I didn't know she was in my company.
What?
I mean, these are big companies with lots of people, but you have a senior woman who's like running manufacturing for a big pharmaceutical company. You know, the vice president of commercial would say, I didn't know we had a woman running that.
Yikes.
So doing the awards really brought, I mean, all the women that get nominated get celebrated. And then, of course, everybody sees them. And somebody who's in the business of hiring somebody will say, oh, I should talk to her. Maybe I could hire her. So there's a lot of networking that happens. Yeah, it's been very productive.
Good for you.
I'm very proud of it. It was fun to put together. Plus, it's fun to just dress up and have a fancy party every now and then.
That's so true. Oh, okay. Well, before I let you go, let's talk a little bit more about your family. You write about your mother and your father. And I asked this question at the beginning, where do you think that you learned, your grit from? But what do you think that your parents taught you about valuing yourself? Because I feel like throughout the memoir, it's just very obvious that you were a woman who knew your worth from the go. And so you weren't as easily deterred. And I think that can go hand in hand with grit and resilience. Yeah. But yeah, do you think that that was modeled to you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My parents were very unusual people, as you get a sense from the book. Like they didn't want us to call them mom and dad. They wanted us to call them by their names, Josie and Dusty. For us, it was normal, but our friends all were like, calling your mom by her first name? Later, when I grew up, I asked them, why did you do that? And they said, we wanted you to think of us as people, not just as parents.
Wow.
We wanted you to realize that we had identities other than just mom and dad. And how thoughtful is that? It's just really, really thoughtful.
Does your son call you Linda?
No. And I didn't try to teach him one way or the other, but his dad was pretty traditional. Okay. So his dad would say, well, your mom this and your mom that. And
yeah.
So yeah, he calls me mom. So that didn't go to the next generation. I don't know. They were just really interesting people. They were voracious readers. My dad was a scientist. But from when I was really little, and my sister too, they gave us a tremendous amount of
Mm,
independence. I would go out in the playground when I was 5 years old by myself and play with a whole bunch of kids. Or we went to a public school that was quite a ways from our neighborhood, and we took the public bus. And when I was like 6 years old, I would get on the public bus and pay with my little quarter and ride to school and get off where I was supposed to get off and go to school. And I was a 6 year
yeah.
old. They gave us a lot of freedom. We took it. We were all over the place. I think that built a lot of confidence. I mean, just learning to ride your two-wheel bike. My dad didn't help me. He gave me the bike and he's like, go figure it out.
Wow.
And I got on the bike and I fell down 100 times and then I figured it out, you
Yeah.
know? So I think the independence built a lot of confidence in both myself and my sister. Well, we would just try stuff.
Yeah.
We had a lot of adventures, but I think it was, now kids are so much more overprotected. And, you would never let your 5 year old or 6 year old get on the public bus by themselves and ride, half an hour
Right.
away. But back then, we just had that kind of freedom and it built a lot of self-confidence.
You do write, you say thank you in your acknowledgments. You write, for bringing me up to believe that a girl could do anything she set her mind to, and for creating a home where logical thinking, taking risks, and challenging the status quo were considered virtues, which I think are beautiful things to consider virtues. So how did you turn around what you took from your parents and apply it to motherhood?
I tried to be as good a parent as my parents were to me. I think it's harder these
Yeah.
days. I think in the world that we live in, it's much more difficult. Kids are more constrained, I think, now than they were then.
Which is interesting to me because we're also technically in a way safer culture and community and society. I mean, I was allowed to ride my bike to my friend's house. She lived kind of far away. But it is weird to me because I don't understand how that flipped when technically like we're in a safer, more surveilled world, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand it either. I think there was just a lot of cultural fear around, missing
Yeah.
children and, that was the era of missing children on the milk cartons
Yeah.
and we see it in our society now. People are
Yeah.
fearful and it's a shame. But I did try to create a home, particularly the logical thinking and challenging the status quo. I have a lot of conversations around the table about why are you doing that exactly? And are you doing that just because everybody else is doing that, or are you doing that because you really want to do
Mhm.
it? And we would have a lot of conversations about that. My second husband was Israeli. He was kind of a status quo guy, so it made him a little
Okay.
uncomfortable.
Okay.
Part of the reason we're not together
Okay.
anymore. But I think my son took away a lot of those same lessons. He's doing really
That's
well.
awesome. How old is your son?
He just got married. He's
Okay.
34. He just got married a couple of years
Okay.
ago. And he had a hyphenated name, my name and his dad's name. So his name was Rhodes Rogan. He married a girl that had a
Oh
hyphenated
my.
name. So I was like, well, how is this going to work out? And I was very proud of the fact that instead of her changing her name to his name, they shuffled the hyphenated names and they chose one of each name and they created a new hyphenated name, one from her and
I
one from
love
him.
that.
And I thought, okay, that's challenging the status quo.
Yes.
That's creative.
Yes. That's incredible. I think my biggest thing that I try to foster in my children is curiosity and exactly thinking for yourself. You can still come to the same conclusion, but let's really dig in. Why are you making the decision that you're making? I think that's really important. I think that's something that
Yeah.
is a little lost right now. I feel bad, like we didn't really get to Vincent. So the entire time that you are navigating breaking the barnyard barrier, you have a husband, and he's kind of put his dream on the back burner to come be with you in
Yeah.
California. And then ultimately you walk us through. He got electrocuted, and that was a really difficult moment for your relationship. At the very end of your book, you write about experiencing this moment of relief. You've said goodbye to your mother. She's died. You've said goodbye to this relationship with your husband. You're kind of looking to the next chapter of your life. What was that moment like for you?
Well, and I also quit my job.
Right.
I had a new job, but yeah, I just felt like all of the weight that I'd been bearing for years of the relationship, of taking care of my parents, of the job, it was just relieved. I was just free of all that. And I felt this great sense of peace over that. Right now, there was going to be nobody who was asking me to do something for them. My dairymen weren't going to be calling me. Vincent wasn't going to be bugging me about anything. My dad was off with, his new life. So I just didn't have to do it anymore. And it was a real feeling of peace and relief and eagerness of what's going to be next. Where am I going? There was some regret. There was some sadness about leaving my community that I'd grown up in Logan and leaving my relationship, but it felt right. It felt like I'd made the right decision. And so there was a real feeling of kind of relief and peace over that. It was, it's always hard when you leave a long relationship. I mean, we'd been together more than 10 years. I mean, he was a sweetheart in college. And it was hard to walk away from that. But as you say, we both knew it was the right decision because we both had different paths that we needed to follow, and they just weren't compatible. I think we left in a good place.
I love that your memoir ends at a new beginning. That's life, right? It's a bunch of new beginnings. It's a bunch of endings.
Yeah, that's exactly
You
right.
write this at the very end. I had grown the confidence that comes from hard work, failures and successes, and showing up day after day, month after month, when almost everyone expected me to give up. Do you think that's the secret to success, Linda?
Oh, absolutely.
Being afraid but not showing it.
Just show up. And, I kind of say, don't be afraid to get dirty.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to dig in, whatever it is, whether it's physical dirt or emotional dirt, just jump in and don't be afraid of it. And I think, it applies to many, many different situations.
I agree. All right. I ask all my authors this question. How do you stay hopeful today?
Oh, I saw that question on your list, and I thought this is a very challenging question, particularly in the last few weeks when we've seen innocent American citizens gunned down in our streets. No matter what political persuasion you are, that should just horrify you. I guess my hope is in building community, as we talked about earlier, seeing so many people come together to help each other, from, organizing rides, buying groceries, guarding schools, just watching out for our neighbors. It's really a beautiful thing. It's kind of what I saw in the Mormon community, that they really made a community. And I think we've been so, we're so ambitious. We're so in our own little worlds, our own little nuclear families, and we're all busy all the time that we forget that building community is really, really important. So I guess that's what gives me hope, is I see people realizing that we have to build more communities, and we are. And it's lovely to see.
Yeah, I think it's been a lost art. When my mom and I moved into a new house when I was in junior high, we had all the neighbors come by within a week with a little baked good to welcome us to the street. My husband and I have moved, and we live in California now. That was Texas. I don't know, maybe a little different, but my husband and I have moved multiple times. And I just met some of our neighbors last week. My daughter's selling Girl Scout cookies, and they came through and supported her, which is very sweet. But I was like, wow. And that's on me too. I can go, when I move in, I can go to a neighbor's house, introduce myself, and I should. So.
And also, as we talked about earlier, keeping touch with old friends and keeping those connections and nurturing those connections, making time to make that phone call and say, do you want to go out for a cup of coffee? Or it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I mean, I think often we think, we have to entertain. So we have to have people over for dinner, which means cooking and means cleaning the house and getting everything put away. I have events with my neighbors where I just say, I'm buying a couple of pizzas. You bring a bottle of wine, come over and spend the evening with me.
Yeah.
I don't clean the house. I just want some company.
Yeah.
It kind of loosened things up a bit in the neighborhood, that people didn't feel like they had to, be a fancy cook to have a dinner party.
Yeah.
That we could just get together. So I think we put these high expectations on each other of what we have to do in order to have people over or go out with people.
Yeah.
The more we take those expectations down and make it less formal and more spontaneous. One of the things I love about living in New Hampshire is that I have neighbors who will call me and say, you want to come over tonight for a glass of wine and some appetizers? And it's like tonight.
Yeah.
It's not like next week, put it on the calendar. It's like, and I always say yes, because that spontaneity of I'm lonely, or we're thinking of you, we just like to see you. That's like gold. We really have to do more of that, because it's what builds our communities.
Yeah, I love that. And if then your neighbor says no, try again. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Just be like, because we're all busy. But you're right, fostering those connections. I really think that is such an important thing that we need to do in our world today. We need to see each other, meet each other, talk to each other again.
Because underneath all this political rhetoric and animosity, we all want the same thing. We all want to be healthy. We want our kids to thrive. We want to have enough food on the table. We want to have shelter. We all want the same basic things.
Yeah.
And so all that other stuff that social media and the political world piles on top of that, if we just get down to basics, you want a good meal, I want a good meal. You want your kids to be safe, I want my kids to be safe. Those are commonalities that we all have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have my Babes in Bookland question jar, and who knows what's in here.
Yeah, fun.
All right, Linda, what's a book that made you feel seen and a book that made you feel judged?
Ooh,
Ooh.
that's an interesting question. A book that made me feel seen. I would go with Jane Austen.
Okay.
I would go with Pride and Prejudice. It's one of the first novels that has a really strong woman in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's from a different era, but a strong woman who knows her mind. I think it was the beginning of women being given some agency about their lives, and
Yeah.
I just love Jane Austen. So the book that made me feel judged, it's easy. It's the book Lean In.
Okay.
That book
By Sheryl Sandberg, right?
Yeah. Lean In is basically saying, oh, women, the reason that you don't get ahead in the world is because you don't seize the difficult challenges in the corporate world and put yourself forward and say, yes, you'll take on that assignment, or you'll be the one to travel to that conference in Japan, or you'll step out of your comfort zone and try to get these two teams to work together. And if you women, if you just leaned in more and took all those opportunities, you would be more successful. Well, I consider myself a failure in the corporate world because I just could not get ahead. I used to say to people, it's not a glass ceiling, it's a dense layer of white men.
Mm.
Sheryl Sandberg was saying, no, it's not prejudice. It's because you're not taking the initiative. You're not leaning in. You're not. Well, of course she could do that because she was a gazillionaire and she could hire a full-time nanny and a cook and a house cleaner and she had plenty of money. And so if she was going to take that 2-week conference in Japan, her nanny would take care of her kids.
Right.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt judged by that and like, yeah, maybe I should have done this or I should have done that. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, this is a bad message for women.
Yeah.
We cannot have it all. And that's part of what I show in my book is that you have to make some hard choices. And so that whole lean in message didn't work for me.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I will link all of the incredible things that you do. We'll keep everyone posted on your Substack when that gets going, and we'll link the way to buy your book.
It's been such a pleasure talking with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really a pleasure.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being here. And if you'd like to further support the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or find us on Patreon for exclusive content and extended episodes. Next week, we're doing something completely different, from a Utah dairy barn to the stages, sitcom sets, and recording studios that made a legend. At 14, Brandy landed her first record deal. At 15, her album went platinum. At 16, she was starring in Moesha and became the first Black actress to play Cinderella on screen, alongside Whitney Houston as her fairy godmother. To the world, she had it all. But in her debut memoir, Phases, she finally reveals the real story, the stratospheric highs, the unimaginable lows, and the journey she had to take to discover her authentic self. My friend Kate joins us. You're not going to want to miss this one. Until then, take care.